Welcome. This is part 2 of a multi-part presentation investigating the prophecy of the 70 weeks that Gabriel gave to Daniel. There are many areas to investigate. In part 1, I dealt with one of the most accepted interpretations of the last century, that of Sir Robert Anderson. I showed that even though his calculations are very ingenious and on the surface seem to point to a significant point in history, in actual fact, his calculations are in error. Even his starting date of when he claims Nisan 1 occurred could not possibly have occurred in history. I then dealt with Harold Honer's improvements to Anderson's calculations. Unfortunately, Honer's calculations are also not accurate, and his assumption of when Nisan 1 occurred are even more in error than Anderson's. Therefore, even though many accept slight variations using the method of converting back and forth to 360-day years, this entire method is flawed and cannot possibly be the way the prophecy should be understood. In order to explain the proper interpretation completely, it will take several parts. There are several complex relationships to consider regarding history, other prophecies, and the many false assumptions that have been built up over the years. However, by the end of this presentation, I'll show you the structure of the interpretation. I won't be able to explain how everything fits together, but you will get a peek into exactly how the prophecy should be understood. Hopefully, you'll be interested in staying with me for all the presentations to see how it all comes together. The biggest problem that I notice with other potential interpretations is that there are far too many assumptions being made. Most read the prophecy as a translation, that is, in English, and immediately try to make their connections from that. Some others do realize that the words were originally spoken in Hebrew and do go about explaining the various meanings of the words, but very few do this. Most of these explanations revolve around how to understand the weeks of years, since we usually only consider weeks of days. Do you want to know the secret? It's not really much of a secret, actually. The secret is to investigate the text of the original language and do word studies. Now, many are familiar with what a concordance is. It is a helpful resource, but you have to realize a concordance lists all the verses where the same English word is used in a translation. Translators of the Bible often do not place the same English word for all the places where the same Hebrew or Greek word is used. They choose the best word according to grammar and textual flow. As an aside, I've recently been listening to the process of translation for the new LSB, that is, the Legacy Standard Bible. One of their stated goals is to use the same English word for every same Hebrew word in the Old Testament, and to give the equivalent meaning as closely as possible. That's very commendable. It is essential to investigate Hebrew words in all the other various places that that same word is used, and to examine its context. I'd like to point out some very useful resources for this type of study. If you are looking for Hebrew and Greek equivalent, use the blueletterbible.org. If you're looking for the Aramaic New Testament, look at dukrana.com. The goal here is to try to remove all assumptions of the text. We have to strip things down to bare bones. The result will be new insights and the answer to the prophecy that I don't believe many, if any, have ever really noticed before. That is, since Daniel. This has nothing to do with a personal interpretation. These insights are available to all, and I encourage you to investigate and verify all of what will be discussed. But I'm warning you, this will ruffle a lot of feathers, especially if you're convinced you know exactly what the prophecy means or you follow well-known prophecy experts. I challenge you to keep an open mind. Weigh each piece of evidence. Some things will be difficult. The prophecy on the surface seems very simple, but it is actually complex. There are elements of history, theology, mathematics, and it's just plain awesome. It's such an elegant solution. That alone is one of the main proofs that what I'm about to lay out is the correct way to interpret the prophecy. Although Anderson and Honer came up with an ingenious proposal, you have to admit that their method is very convoluted and complicated, and not many can really get their head around all the calculations. So first, let's examine the chapter as a whole. We could choose any English translation, but I've chosen the ESV, or the English Standard Version. I'll get into why shortly, but for this part, it doesn't really make a difference. This may already look complicated, but it's really not. I've color-coded the main blocks of text that are similar subject matter. Scattered within are highlighted words which are significant to the passage. Colors show the exact same word in Hebrew, even if the English translators chose to use a different word. So let's start with the subject matter. The blue section is narrative text. It tells what is happening. The orange block of text is Daniel's prayer, then followed by another section of blue narrative. This is followed by Gabriel's words. Most people who delve deeply into the chapter really only deal with the yellow portion. Although they do have to consider some of the blue narrative portion, for the most part, hardly anyone really considers the largest portion, that is, the orange section of Daniel's prayer. I would suggest that Daniel's prayer is very significant because it is his immediate response to what he had just understood. Something clicked with the subject matter he had been reading, and Gabriel was immediately sent to give Daniel an answer. We won't go into great detail at this point, but just notice all the words that have been highlighted. See how often similar words are used in the chapter? I think a lot of the difficulties in interpreting the 70 weeks portion can be dealt with just by looking how the same word has been used elsewhere, just in this chapter alone. For example, look at the word for king in the first section. It does not occur in the 70 weeks portion, even though many state that the concept of Messiah, the King of Kings, is crucial to the interpretation. The text doesn't actually say that. Now, the 70 weeks portion makes use of the word prince or ruler, but the word used for prince in the 70 weeks portion is different from the other word used prince elsewhere in the chapter. But how exactly is that similar or different? Consider all the times that the concept of understanding or insight occur. Gabriel's words were understood by Daniel. Gabriel was sent to teach Daniel and allow him to understand everything. But Gabriel specifically told Daniel to seal up or hide the meaning for the rest of us. This is why this passage has been so difficult to make sense of since the time it was written. It was meant to be this way until the time was right to know how to precisely interpret it. Another very significant thing to notice is the absence of the concept of a decree. Other translations make use of this specific term. However, this translation makes use of the concept of an oral utterance. Just the words, just speaking. 7 times in this chapter is it used this way. That is an important hint that one of the 3 decrees of kings that people constantly fight over isn't even what is being talked about. Now, I told you some of this will be hard to accept. We've assumed a lot of things over the years, but we are taking baby steps here. Finally, notice the word for covenant used in the 70 weeks portion. This same word is used earlier in the chapter. It is specifically used of God and is proof of his steadfast love and those who keep his commandments. It really has nothing to do with a peace treaty. I'll get into that more in another presentation. These are just initial observations. We haven't even investigated them. They are important clues. However, I'm simply pointing out that many people don't do this exercise and investigate the original language to see what can be discovered. Using an English translation often leads to a very specific interpretation that the translators themselves had, and that is what we have to investigate next. Let's discuss one of the most well-known translations of this passage, the King James Version. Notice that Messiah and Prince are capitalized. What does this make you think? It obviously suggests that it is talking about Jesus Christ as the Messiah, and it reminds you of Isaiah 9:6, where it talks about Prince of Peace. Well, first, if you investigate what Hebrew word is used in Isaiah 9:6, you will find it is not even the same Hebrew word that Daniel uses. But there's something even more seriously wrong with the translation. The Hebrew language does not use capital letters. That's right. The King James translators inserted their particular bias into the English text and made capitals where they do not occur in the original language. And the other thing is that Hebrew does not use any punctuation. Nope, none. Just to visualize what this means, let's remove all the capital letters and punctuation from the text. That is similar to what the translators were confronted with and had to make grammatical sense of. Here is what the actual Hebrew text looks like for the passage. As a further point, Hebrew is read from right to left. Notice no capital letters. Notice no punctuation between sentences. For hundreds of years since the King James Version was published, those who have read Daniel 9 have been conditioned to think of the passage in a certain way, with certain words being defined for them. I found that the majority of those discussing aspects of the 70 weeks do so based on using the text of the King James Version. It will be very difficult for people to keep their long-standing biases from interfering and accepting contrary facts. I ask that you try to keep an open mind. But do other English translations also include capitalized words? Since verses 25 and 26 are the keys to the timeline, let's compare what different versions have to say. So here in the King James Version, we've already talked about capitalized Messiah and Prince. And here in the New International Version, they capitalize Anointed One. And then for the New American Standard Version, again, Messiah and Prince are capitalized. But here are three others. The American Standard Version does not include any capitalization. Neither for the Revised Standard Version. And we've also looked at the English Standard Version. No capitals. There is another very big difference. I would submit that this is the most important difference that most people are not aware of. Let's compare the time cues of the King James Version with the English Standard Version. In verse 25 of the King James, it states, "From the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks." The time periods of 7 weeks and 62 are combined together. They are separate groups, but in the text they are combined, so that there is no other way to think about them other than 7 plus 62 or 69 weeks together. Now compare that with verse 25 in the English Standard Version. "From the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again." There is a definite and noticeable separation between those two groups. The anointed one, a prince, comes at the end of the first group of 7. Then the next group of 62 happened. This text does not combine them into a period of 69 weeks, but each group has a particular start and end point. This is a major difference. Those reading the King James come to an entirely different understanding of the structure of the time periods. The readers of the English Standard Version will not see the same thing that readers of the King James Version see. I have not found that this major difference has ever been addressed. Actually, this very observation is what prompted me to do a serious study of this prophecy. Back in 2008, I was evaluating the English Standard Version, which was new to me at the time. Daniel 9 always has been an important text that I look at in various translations. Although this difference is in other older translations, for some reason this only became a proof text to me when evaluating the ESV. Did they get this wrong? If not, then why is the King James Version so different? Who is right? I felt compelled to investigate the original Hebrew language and try to determine what had happened. Now, I'm not an expert in Hebrew. However, I have studied various aspects of the language to try to familiarize myself with the rules of the language. For this passage, the lack of punctuation is the most important issue. When there is such a specific intent to lay out groups of years, getting the order correct is of utmost importance. Many times in Hebrew, and Aramaic for that matter, instead of punctuation, they use the word and to separate thoughts and sentences. So in Hebrew, the first groups are stated from word to restore Jerusalem to anointed one prince are 7 weeks and 62 weeks returned, rebuilt Jerusalem. The second time cue states, and after 62 weeks, anointed one cut off. And the final time cue states, cause to confirm covenant for many 1 week, and half a week cause to cease sacrifice and offering. Now notice that the third cue, the 1 week and the half week, have an and between them. However, no one suggests that they should be added together so that it reads 1.5 weeks. Gabriel states that it is 70 weeks in total. There is no place for an additional half a week. So the and is treated as a break between the two statements. In the second cue, there is just the mention of a single group of 62 weeks. This has always been a question. If the first 7 and the second 62 should be combined into 69, then why did Gabriel only specifically state after 62 weeks? There must be something significant in stating those two periods separately. However, a lot of translations lump them together because the Hebrew text contains an and in English when you see and, you combine them. But in Hebrew, they are often separate thoughts. Can you now begin to see the problems that the translators had in making sense of a text that has been purposely sealed? Gabriel specifically told Daniel to seal it up. It was meant to be hard to understand from the very beginning. The ESV translation has chosen to treat each individual group of weeks separately, which most closely follows the grammatical rules of the Hebrew language. This gives quite a different structure to the passage than many people assume is the case, especially having been exposed to the choices made in the King James translation. Everything that has been discussed so far is just the base essentials in order to navigate through the assumptions and false information that has been built up over the years. There is a lot more to investigate. However, I did promise that I would show you how the prophecy should be understood. But before I do, there is one last thing I need to draw to your attention. Take a look at Daniel 9:23. This is Gabriel's opening comments to Daniel. He tells him to understand the matter and consider the vision. Most people just whiz by that statement, but it really gives the clue as to what is about to follow. There are two statements. Gabriel wasn't just being verbose. The word used for the matter is something I already pointed out. It is the same word for the act of speaking or what is uttered. The subject matter. It's the exact same word used just a couple of sentences later when Gabriel states the starting point of the 7 weeks. And it will be the utterance to restore and rebuild Jerusalem in verse 25. The second statement is about the vision. This word does not mean having a dream or being in an ecstatic state. Compare with Daniel 8:15, where the word vision means he did have an out-of-body experience. But later in the verse, the word translated as appearance occurs, which is the same word as vision in Daniel 9. It is what is observed with the eyes. It can also have the sense of a pattern or blueprint. Look at Numbers 8 verse 4. And this work of the candlestick was of beaten gold, unto the shaft thereof, unto the flowers thereof was beaten work, according unto the pattern which God, or the Lord, had showed Moses. So he made the candlestick. Here the word pattern is the same word translated as vision. God had shown Moses how the candlestick should look when it was being made. It was a blueprint. The two statements of Gabriel instructed Daniel to understand the subject matter being talked about and visualize the resulting pattern of the time periods that would be given. It was a blueprint or pattern of how time would be organized. Here is the pattern I believe Daniel understood. Notice that there are 3 separate and distinct groups of weeks. The usual assumption to combine the 7 with the 62 is not correct. Gabriel mentioned 3 groups of time, and he meant 3 separate groups of time. Many people realize that the complete fulfillment of the prophecy has not happened yet. There are portions that are still to happen before Gabriel's 6 stated goals are completed. The existence of a gap has been well understood. However, with 3 separate and distinct groups of 7, that means there are actually 2 gaps that occur in the pattern. And in addition, it's not just that these gaps exist, but these gaps are themselves groups of 7, unstated groups of weeks. The first is 14 weeks in length, that is 14 times 7, which is 98 years. The second gap is what we are currently living in. Taking into account where the end of the 62 weeks occurs, we are in a gap of roughly 289.5 times 7 weeks, or 2027 years so far. Further presentations will go through these anchor points very thoroughly to explain how and why this is all structured this way. But I just wanted to give you a sneak peek as to what it looks like at the end. Yes, this is completely different from what people usually consider the 70 weeks to mean. I hope you stay with me as the investigation into this incredible prophetic passage continues. I guarantee you will never look at this prophecy the same way again.